quiet millionaire walked into an adoption hall just to donate and leave. But when he heard a small girl whisper, "Nobody ever picks me," something inside him broke. What he did next would expose a hidden truth, challenge a powerful lie, and change one forgotten child's life forever. The County Community Center in Cleveland tried very hard to look hopeful. Bright paper banners hung across the low-ceiling Foster Care Awareness Day, written in cheerful letters that curled slightly at the edges. Folding chairs formed neat rows that faced a small open space near the front of the room. Someone had arranged trays of sugar cookies on a long table beside a plastic jug of lemonade. Volunteers moved around quietly, smiling too much, speaking too gently. But the children standing on the colored tape lines across the floor understood something the decorations could not hide. This was a lineup. Each child had a strip of tape beneath their shoes, red, green, yellow, blue, like markers, in a quiet audition. 9-year-old Lila Wren stood on the strip of blue tape. She looked smaller than the other kids, though she wasn't the youngest. Her shoulders curved inward slightly, like she had learned that taking up less space sometimes made adults more comfortable. Her brown sweater sleeves covered half her hands. Her sneakers had once been white, but the color had faded into a soft gray of many sidewalks. Families moved slowly down the line. They bent forward politely. They asked careful questions. Does she have medical needs? Is she independent? She seems very quiet. The voices were gentle. The meaning wasn't. Lila kept her hands clasped together so tightly that her knuckles turned pale. She had learned something important in places like this. Don't reach first. Reaching scared people away. One couple stopped in front of her for a moment. The woman glanced at a folder a volunteer carried under her arm. The man nodded politely, then murmured something about not the right fit. They moved on. Lila watched them walk away for exactly 2 seconds longer than she meant to. Then she lowered her gaze to her shoes. Her voice was barely louder than the hum of the fluorescent lights overhead. "Nobody picks me," she whispered. A small pause. They never do. It wasn't a complaint. It was a fact she had already accepted. Near the back wall of the community hall, where one of the fluorescent lights flickered faintly every few seconds, a man stood apart from the families. Rowan Vale had not intended to stay long. At 39, the CEO of Vale Dynamics, a rapidly expanding logistics technology firm, had built a reputation for efficiency. His company moved cargo systems across the Midwest like an invisible network of arteries. Investors trusted his judgment. Competitors respected his quiet precision. Rowan had come tonight for a simple reason: donate. Shake hands. Leave. That was the plan. He wore a dark charcoal coat that fit perfectly across his shoulders, and he carried himself with the still composure of someone accustomed to rooms falling quiet when he began speaking. But he wasn't speaking now. He was watching. Across the room, the children stood on their strips of tape. Volunteers hovered nearby with folders. Families drifted slowly along the line. Rowan's eyes followed one small movement. A couple stepping away from a girl on blue tape. The girl didn't move when they left. She didn't chase them with hopeful questions the way some of the younger children did. She didn't try to smile bigger. She simply stood there. Then Rowan heard the words, "Nobody picks me." The sentence was so soft that most of the room didn't notice it, but Rowan did. He didn't feel pity. He had seen hardship before. He funded programs designed to reduce it. What unsettled him was the tone. There was no anger in the girl's voice, no pleading, only resignation. 9 years old and already speaking like someone who had stopped expecting rescue. Something inside Rowan shifted in a way he hadn't anticipated when he walked into the building. He looked at the exit sign on the far wall. He could still leave quietly. Instead, he found himself moving, slowly, directly toward the strip of blue tape. The conversations around the room continued, but they softened slightly as Rowan Vale crossed the hall. Presence has gravity. Even people who didn't recognize him immediately felt it. He stopped in front of the girl standing on the blue tape. Lila Wren didn't look up right away. Adults often stood over her like this, evaluating, comparing, deciding. She had learned not to interrupt the process, but something unexpected happened. Instead of remaining above her, the man bent down. Then he lowered himself completely until his eyes were level with hers. The motion was slow, deliberate, not casual. The world looked different from this angle. Lila blinked in surprise because adults rarely bothered to see things from a child's height. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Rowan studied the girl in front of him, the thin wrists, the cautious posture, the way her hands were folded tightly together, like someone bracing for disappointment. When he finally spoke, his voice was quiet enough that only she could hear it. "I'm not here to choose a project." The word made Lila flinch slightly. She had heard versions of that word before: case placement responsibility. Rowan noticed the reaction immediately. His tone softened. "I'm here to choose you." The sentence didn't echo through the room. It simply landed between them. Lila searched his face carefully. Children in systems like this develop a talent for reading adults. Promises especially had a way of dissolving quickly. "You don't even know me," she whispered. A faint smile touched Rowan's expression, not the polished smile he used in boardrooms, but something quieter. "I know one thing," he said. She waited. "You shouldn't have to audition to matter." Silence lingered for another long second. Then Lila gave the smallest nod. It wasn't trust. Not yet. But it was permission. For a moment, the busy community hall seemed to narrow into a quiet circle around the two of them. Rowan Vale remained kneeling, not halfway down, not resting casually on one knee like adults sometimes did when speaking to children. He lowered himself completely until he was perfectly eye level with Lila Wren. The difference mattered. Children notice when someone chooses their perspective. Lila blinked, adjusting to the unusual angle. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead. Somewhere behind them, a volunteer laughed softly while pouring lemonade into paper cups. The ordinary sounds of the room continued, but they felt distant. "You don't even know me," Lila said again, a little more firmly this time. It wasn't defiance. It was caution. Rowan considered the sentence carefully before answering. "You're right," he said calmly. "I don't know everything about you." Lila studied his face, waiting for the familiar follow-up question adults always asked next. "Do you behave? Do you listen? Are you difficult instead?" Rowan said something else. "But I know you shouldn't have to prove you're worth choosing." The girl's fingers tightened together in front of her sweater. For a long second, she didn't respond. Children in systems like this develop an instinct to test promises before believing them. "You might change your mind," she whispered. Rowan nodded once. "That's a fair worry." He didn't argue. He didn't rush to reassure her with big promises. Instead, he simply waited. Patience, he had learned in business, often revealed more truth than persuasion. Across the room, a volunteer glanced over curiously. A few families slowed their conversations as they noticed the well-dressed man kneeling beside the quiet girl on the blue tape. Lila noticed the attention too. Her shoulders curled slightly inward again. Rowan saw that as well. "I'm not in a hurry," he said gently. "You can take your time deciding if you want to trust me." That word "deciding" caught her attention. Adults usually decided things for children like her. They rarely offered choices. "You're asking me," she said slowly. "Yes." Another pause stretched between them. Lila looked down at the strip of blue tape beneath her shoes. She had stood on that line for nearly 2 hours, watching people come and go, watching other children leave with families, watching the door close again and again. Finally, she lifted her eyes back to Rowan. Very slowly, she nodded. It was small, careful. but it was enough. Rowan stood offering his hand, not pulling, just holding it out. After a moment, Lila placed her small fingers into his palm. For the first time that evening, someone in the room had not walked past her. Across the community hall, Janine Crow watched the moment unfold with professional calm. As the director of the county adoption center, she had attended hundreds of events like this. Children placed, children overlooked, families hesitating, disappointments quietly folded away behind polite smiles. But this interaction caught her attention immediately. Not because of the girl, because of the man. Janine recognized Rowan Vale the moment he walked through the door earlier that evening. Men like him were difficult to miss. Wealth had a certain silhouette. His company's expansion across the Midwest had appeared frequently in Cleveland's business pages over the past few years. Investors described him as disciplined, private, efficient. A man who solved problems quickly. Janine preferred predictable donors. People who wrote checks, shook hands, and left before asking complicated questions. Watching Rowan kneel beside Lila had introduced a variable she hadn't expected. When Lila took his hand, Janine's smile remained perfectly in place, but her eyes sharpened slightly. She stepped quietly toward the hallway beside her office, slipping her phone from the pocket of her blazer. Her manicured thumb hovered above the screen for only a moment. Then she typed, "He's taking her." The message disappeared into the digital ether with a soft tap. Janine slid the phone back into her pocket and returned to the room just as smoothly as she had left. No one watching would have noticed anything unusual, but somewhere across the city another phone vibrated on a kitchen counter. Back in the hall, Rowan walked slowly toward the front desk with Lila beside him. She stayed close, her hand still wrapped around two of his fingers. Not clinging, just anchoring. Mr. Vale, Janine greeted warmly as they approached. "What a pleasant surprise. I didn't realize you were planning to participate tonight." Rowan nodded politely. "I wasn't," he said. Janine's smile widened slightly, and now Rowan glanced down at Lila. "Now I am." Janine clasped her hands together thoughtfully. "Well," she said carefully, "that's certainly something we can discuss. There are procedures, of course. Temporary placements, evaluations." Her voice remained smooth, reassuring. But Rowan noticed something subtle, the faint tension behind the words. Across the room, volunteers began quietly gathering folders. The event was ending. Lila looked up at Rowan again. "You're still here," she said quietly. "I said I would be." She nodded once more, absorbing that. Neither of them noticed the quiet ripple already beginning to spread beyond the walls of the community center. Across Cleveland, in a quiet suburban neighborhood 20 minutes away, a phone buzzed against a marble kitchen counter. The house was immaculate. New cabinetry, fresh paint, modern lighting that cast a soft glow across polished surfaces. Very little remained from the previous owner who had lived there before, except the property deed and the trust account. Corinne Vale stood at the sink, rinsing a wine glass, when the vibration caught her attention. She dried her hands carefully before picking up the phone. Her eyes scanned the message. "He's taking her." For a moment she didn't move. Then her jaw tightened. "That's not possible," she murmured quietly. Corinne walked toward the dining table where a neat folder lay open beside her laptop. Across the top of the document was a printed title, "Trust Distribution Schedule." Beneath it, rows of dates and numbers were arranged with precise clarity. Monthly transfers, consistent amounts, reliable income. The trust had been established by her late husband before his death, structured specifically to provide for his daughter, Lila Wren. But the funds were released to the legal guardian responsible for her care, Corinne. She had never considered the arrangement complicated. Guardianship remained in her name. The paperwork filed months earlier had been structured carefully. Physical placement elsewhere. Legal positioning unchanged. A practical solution. Until now. Corinne picked up the phone again and reread the message. He's taking her. Her mind moved quickly, calculating. If someone pursued formal guardianship, if legal custody transferred, the trust would redirect. Funds would move into a court-managed account for the child. Control would disappear. Corinne closed the folder sharply. No, she said under her breath. Across the city, Rowan Vale was helping a quiet 9-year-old girl carry a small pink suitcase out of a community center. But Corinne Vale wasn't thinking about the child. She was thinking about the numbers on that page. And numbers, once someone builds their life around them, can be very difficult to surrender. She picked up her phone again. This time, she dialed a number instead of sending a message. When the call connected, her voice was calm, controlled. "We have a situation," she said. Outside her window, evening lights flickered on across the neighborhood. Back at the adoption center, Rowan opened the passenger door of his car for Lila. Neither of them yet realized that choosing each other had already started a fight. The drive from the community center to Rowan Vale's home took less than 30 minutes. But for Lila Wren, it felt like crossing into another world. City streets slowly gave way to quieter neighborhoods. Storefront lights faded behind them. The car climbed a narrow road that curved along the edge of Lake Erie, where the dark water reflected faint silver from the moon. Rowan's house appeared at the top of the hill. Glass, steel, clean lines that looked almost too precise against the dark sky. From the outside, it was impressive but not warm. The kind of house designed to impress investors, not children. Rowan stepped out first and opened Lila's door. "You can bring your suitcase," he said gently. Lila nodded and lifted the small pink case from the seat. One of its wheels dragged slightly, clicking softly as she rolled it across the driveway. Inside the house was very quiet. No music, no television. Just the faint hum of the heating system and the distant sound of the lake wind outside. The floor gleamed under soft, recessed lighting. Everything had a place. Everything looked untouched. Lila paused just inside the doorway. Children who had moved through many temporary homes develop a habit waiting for someone to correct them. "Not there. Don't touch that. You're only staying tonight." Rowan noticed the hesitation immediately. "You're not in the way," he said calmly. Lila glanced up, then she stepped forward slowly. The ceiling of the foyer stretched 2 stories high, and a wide staircase curved toward the second floor. Rowan picked up the pink suitcase when the broken wheel caught again. "Your room is upstairs." Lila froze for a moment. "Your room," Rowan repeated quietly. "Not a guest room. Children always hear the difference." They climbed the stairs together. The hallway was simple, soft gray walls, warm lighting, quiet. Rowan opened a door halfway down the corridor. Inside waited a bedroom that had been prepared carefully but without excess. A small bed with a folded quilt, a desk beside the window, a bookshelf with only a few empty spaces, and on the nightstand plugged into the wall, a small moon-shaped nightlight glowing softly. Lila stepped inside. She set her suitcase near the bed but didn't open it. Instead, she moved toward the wall beside the door and stood there facing outward, watching the hallway, watching the exits. Rowan didn't comment. He simply said one thing. "You can move anything in here if you want." Lila reached out slowly and touched the nightlight. "Does it stay on?" she asked. All night, she absorbed that quietly. Predictable light. For children who have known uncertainty, small consistencies matter more than grand promises. Later that evening, Rowan stood in the kitchen, warming soup on the stove. The kitchen matched the rest of the house, orderly, uncluttered, almost too perfect. Stainless steel counters reflected the soft light overhead. He moved with practiced efficiency. Soup poured into a bowl. Bread warmed in the oven. A glass of milk placed carefully beside the plate. Across the island counter, Lila sat quietly on a tall stool, her feet swinging several inches above the floor. She watched everything. Children who have experienced instability often study their surroundings, carefully tracking patterns, measuring tone, preparing for change. Rowan set the bowl in front of her. Steam curled upward in soft spirals. Lila stared at it. Not eagerly, not suspiciously. Just cautiously. Too hot, Rowan asked. She shook her head, but she didn't take the spoon immediately. Instead, her hand slipped quietly into the pocket of her hoodie. Rowan noticed the movement. His eyes tracked it without saying anything. Inside the pocket was a small object she had taken from the community center earlier. A dinner roll. Flattened slightly from being carried. Saved. Children who have gone hungry often learn this instinct early, save something for later, because later is uncertain. Lila broke a tiny piece from the roll and slipped the rest deeper into her pocket, before finally lifting the spoon. Rowan placed another warm roll beside her bowl. "You don't have to save food here," he said gently. The sentence landed carefully in the room. Lila froze mid-motion. Her eyes flicked up toward him wide with surprise. "I wasn't," she murmured quickly. Rowan didn't challenge the lie. "You don't have to," he repeated. That was all. No lecture. No pity. Just information. Lila looked down at the new roll sitting beside the bowl. For several seconds, she didn't touch it. Then she slowly removed the flattened one from her pocket and set it quietly beside the fresh one. A small decision, but an important one. Trust does not arrive in dramatic declarations. It appears in moments like this. Across the kitchen, Rowan leaned casually against the counter, pretending not to watch too closely. But he noticed everything, the way Lila took smaller bites than necessary. The way she glanced toward the door every few seconds. The way her shoulders stayed slightly tense, as if ready to leave quickly if needed. Children learn survival habits long before they learn comfort. Rowan understood that, and comfort, he knew, could not be rushed. After dinner, the house returned to its usual quiet. Lila had gone upstairs to explore the bedroom again. Her footsteps moved softly along the hallway floorboards before the faint click of the door closing halfway. Rowan walked down the hall toward his office. The room overlooked the dark stretch of Lake Erie. Through the wide glass windows, the water reflected scattered lights from the distant Cleveland shoreline. Inside, the office felt different from the rest of the house. Still orderly, but heavier somehow. On Rowan's desk sat a single framed photograph. It faced downward. It had faced downward for 3 years. Rowan stopped beside the desk and rested his hand lightly on the frame. He didn't turn it over immediately. Looking meant remembering details he had worked very hard to control. The color of the sky that day. The sound of laughter carried on ocean wind. The weight of a small hand wrapped around his finger. His daughter. The world had called it a tragic accident, one of those events that briefly filled headlines before fading into statistics. Rowan had never spoken about it publicly. He had simply returned to work earlier than anyone expected and expanded his company with relentless focus. Success, people often said, was the best way to move forward, but success doesn't erase memory. He finally lifted the frame and turned it upright. The photograph showed a beach, bright sunlight. A little girl laughing mid-stride as she ran along wet sand beside him. The image captured motion, wind through her hair, water splashing at her feet. Pure joy frozen in a single second. Rowan studied the photo quietly. The ache that followed was familiar. Sharp, unavoidable. Down the hallway, he heard a faint creak from the floorboards above. Lila moving around her new room. A different child. A different story. But the same fragile possibility. Rowan set the photograph back on the desk. This time he didn't turn it face down. Instead, he reached for his phone. There was someone he needed to call. A woman who had spent 20 years investigating child welfare cases and who rarely trusted convenient paperwork. The phone rang twice before the line connected. "Tessa Rourke," the voice answered. Rowan looked once more toward the hallway where the soft glow of the moon-shaped nightlight shone faintly beneath Lila's door. "There's something wrong with the file," he said quietly. On the other end of the line, Tessa paused. "What kind of wrong?" Rowan exhaled slowly. "The kind that looks designed." And somewhere in the quiet space between those two sentences, the story began to change. Tessa Rourke had spent most of her adult life reading files that told incomplete stories. 22 years working in child welfare had taught her one simple rule: paperwork rarely lies outright, but it often hides the truth between the lines. Her office sat on the third floor of an aging county building downtown. Fluorescent lights hummed overhead, and stacks of folders leaned against each other like tired witnesses. When Rowan Vale called earlier that evening, she recognized the tone immediately. Not emotional, observational. People who described problems that way usually noticed things others missed. Now, hours later, Tessa sat in front of her laptop reviewing Lila Wren's case file. The digital folder was thicker than expected. Medical notes, school reports, behavioral observations. Every document used the same careful language. Quiet. Withdrawn. Possibly fragile. None of the words were technically incorrect. But together they created a portrait that felt exaggerated. Tessa leaned back in her chair. Then she opened the legal documentation attached to the file. That was where the pattern began to show itself. 6 months earlier, following the death of Lila's father, guardianship paperwork had been filed by the stepmother, Corinne Vale. At first glance, the arrangement looked ordinary: temporary placement, institutional oversight. But the structure was unusual. Physical custody had been transferred. Legal guardianship had not. Tessa frowned slightly and opened another tab. Financial records connected to the estate appeared on the screen. And there it was. A trust fund, established by Lila's father shortly before his death. Monthly distributions scheduled for the legal guardian responsible for the child's care. Tessa's eyes narrowed. The timing aligned too neatly. The trust had activated. Then the surrender paperwork had been filed. Not to end guardianship, to preserve it. Her phone buzzed softly beside the keyboard. A message from Rowan. "Anything unusual?" Tessa typed back slowly. "Yes." Then she added a second message. "The structure keeps the stepmother in legal control while the child lives somewhere else." A pause. 3 dots appeared on the screen. Rowan responded. "Meaning the money continues to flow." Tessa stared at the documents again. "Yes," she murmured quietly to herself. That was exactly what it meant. Across town, Rowan stood in the quiet hallway outside Lila's bedroom door. The moon-shaped nightlight glowed faintly through the crack beneath it. He read Tessa's message again, and for the first time since leaving the community center, he understood something clearly. Choosing Lila might not just be an act of kindness, it might be an interruption. And people rarely appreciate interruptions when money is involved. The house remained quiet long after midnight. Rowan sat in his office reviewing the messages from Tessa when he heard a sound from upstairs. Not loud, just a quick movement, a sharp inhale, then silence again. He waited a moment listening. Another sound followed. A small voice. "Rebecca." Rowan stood immediately. He moved down the hallway without turning on the overhead lights. The soft glow of the nightlight guided him toward Lila's room. The door was half open. Inside, Lila sat upright in the bed. Her breathing was fast and uneven, her eyes wide but unfocused. Rowan stayed near the doorway for a second before stepping closer. "Lila," he said quietly. She didn't respond right away. "Rebecca," she whispered again. The name carried fear, not affection. Rowan crouched beside the bed but kept his hands to himself. Children who have experienced instability often react poorly to sudden touch. "It's okay," he said calmly. "You're safe here." Her breathing gradually slowed as her eyes focused on him. For a moment she looked confused, then embarrassed. "I'm sorry," she said quickly. "You don't need to apologize." Lila rubbed her eyes. "I thought I heard her." Rowan shook his head gently. "She's not here." A small pause followed. Lila nodded, but her fingers twisted nervously in the blanket. Then she said something so quietly, Rowan almost missed it. "Don't let her sign again." Rowan's expression changed slightly. "What do you mean?" Lila stared at the blanket. "She signs papers when I'm in my room," she whispered. Another pause. "On the first." The sentence hung in the air. Rowan felt something tighten in his chest. The first. The trust payments Tessa mentioned were scheduled for the first of each month. He kept his voice calm. "You don't have to worry about that tonight." Lila looked up. "Promise." Rowan nodded once. "I promise." He stayed beside the bed until her breathing returned to normal and her eyes slowly closed again. When Rowan finally stood and stepped into the hallway, the quiet house felt different than it had earlier that evening. Not empty anymore. Alert. As if the truth had just begun to reveal itself. Morning light filtered softly through the large windows in Rowan's kitchen. For the first time in years, the house showed signs of movement. A cereal bowl sat near the sink. A chair had been pulled away from the table slightly. Upstairs, faint footsteps suggested that Lila was exploring the hallway again. Rowan stood at the counter reviewing documents when the doorbell rang. Tessa Rourke stepped inside a moment later, carrying a tablet and a folder. "I brought copies," she said. Rowan gestured toward the kitchen island. "What did you find?" Tessa opened the folder and spread several documents across the counter. "The trust fund is legitimate," she said, "established by Lila's father shortly before his death." Rowan nodded. "And the guardianship, that's where it gets complicated." Tessa tapped a highlighted paragraph. "The paperwork filed by Corinne Vale surrendered physical custody to the county facility, but not legal guardianship." Rowan finished the sentence for her. Tessa nodded. "That keeps her eligible for the monthly trust distributions." Rowan leaned back slightly, absorbing the information. "So the child is moved out of the house, but the money stays?" Tessa finished. A quiet silence followed. Upstairs, a floorboard creaked. Rowan glanced toward the staircase. "She told me something last night," he said. "What her stepmother signs papers on the first." Tessa's eyes narrowed slightly. "That aligns perfectly with the payment schedule." Before Rowan could respond, soft footsteps appeared at the top of the stairs. Lila stood there in an oversized sweater, watching them cautiously. Children always sense when adults are discussing something important. "Am I going back?" she asked. The question landed heavily in the kitchen. Tessa immediately stepped closer to the staircase so she could meet the girl at eye level. "No," she said gently. Lila looked from Tessa to Rowan. "Someone might try," Rowan added honestly. Her shoulders stiffened. "But we won't let that happen." Another quiet moment passed. Then Lila nodded once. Carefully, like someone storing the promise for later examination. Down on the kitchen counter, the trust documents remained spread open beneath the morning sunlight. Numbers, dates, legal clauses, evidence that somewhere along the line a child had been treated less like a person and more like a financial arrangement. And now that arrangement was beginning to unravel. By late afternoon, Rowan's kitchen had transformed into something that looked less like a home and more like a strategy room. Documents covered the island counter, trust records, guardianship filings, estate timelines. At the center of the papers stood Miles Ketter, Rowan's longtime legal counsel. Miles had the quiet patience of someone who preferred evidence over speeches. In his mid-40s, with thin glasses and a careful way of speaking, he had built a career dismantling complicated financial structures. He studied the documents slowly. Then he tapped one page with his pen. "There's a pattern," he said. Tessa folded her arms. "We thought so." Miles turned the document so Rowan could see the highlighted column. These are the trust distributions. Monthly transfers released to the legal guardian. Rowan nodded. And this, Miles continued, pointing to another page, is the guardianship surrender filed by Corinne Vale. He slid both documents side by side. The dates aligned almost perfectly. The trust activated. 3 weeks later, Lila had been moved into county placement. But the legal guardianship had remained untouched. Miles leaned back slightly. That's not abandonment, he said calmly. That's retention. Rowan crossed his arms. A revenue stream. Miles gave a small nod. Exactly, Tessa added quietly. If Rowan becomes the legal guardian, the trust reroutes. Miles finished the sentence. The funds move into a court-controlled account for Lila. Corinne loses access entirely. Silence settled across the room. Upstairs, a faint sound suggested Lila walking across the hallway floor. Rowan glanced toward the staircase. Miles followed his gaze. She doesn't know any of this, does she? No, Rowan said. Miles exhaled slowly. She shouldn't have to. He gathered the documents into a single stack, which means we move quickly. Tessa raised an eyebrow. How quickly? Miles looked at Rowan. Emergency guardianship petition. What does that do? It freezes the situation, Miles explained. Corinne can't manipulate the legal structure if the court recognizes you as the acting guardian. Rowan nodded. And if she fights it? Miles gave a thin smile. She will, Tessa added, especially if money is involved. Miles slid the paperwork toward Rowan. Then we follow the money until the truth becomes obvious. Across the kitchen, sunlight continued moving slowly across the counter. Numbers and signatures glowed beneath the light. For months, those documents had quietly protected a financial arrangement. Now they were becoming evidence, and evidence had a way of changing the direction of a story. 2 days later, Rowan stood beside Lila in the front office of a small elementary school. The hallway outside buzzed with ordinary sounds. Lockers closing, children laughing, teachers calling names, the everyday rhythm of a normal morning. For Lila, it felt unfamiliar. She stood quietly beside Rowan with a navy blue backpack pressed against her chest. The school secretary smiled kindly from behind the desk. We just need to verify the guardianship paperwork, she said, as she typed into the computer. Rowan handed over the temporary emergency documents Miles had filed the day before. The printer hummed softly. For a moment, everything seemed routine. Then the secretary's smile faded slightly. Just a moment, she said. She picked up the phone. Lila noticed the change immediately. Children who have experienced instability learn to read tone faster than words. 10 minutes later, the office door opened. 2 county officials stepped inside. Polite, professional, unavoidable, Mr. Vale, one of them asked. Yes. There's been a filing this morning contesting the emergency guardianship. Lila's fingers tightened around Rowan's jacket sleeve. The official continued. Until the court reviews the petition, we may need to return the child to temporary county supervision. Return. The word echoed in the room. Lila went pale. Her grip on Rowan's sleeve tightened. Please, she whispered. Her voice was so small it barely carried across the room. Don't send me back where nobody picks me. Rowan didn't react immediately. He simply became very still. In business negotiations, stillness often meant calculation. Show me the written order, he said calmly. The official hesitated. We have verbal authorization. Rowan shook his head. Written. The door behind them opened again. A woman stepped inside wearing a soft beige coat and carefully composed expression. Corinne Vale. Lila stiffened instantly. Corinne approached, slowly projecting concern. I came as soon as I heard, she said to the officials. Her voice was warm, measured. I'm worried about my stepdaughter. She looked down at Lila, but the kindness in her expression never reached her eyes. The school office grew noticeably quieter as the tension thickened. Corinne placed a gentle hand against her chest. performing concern for the adults in the room. "I only want what's best for her," she said softly. The secretary watched uncertainly. The county officials exchanged glances. Corinne turned slightly toward Lila. From a distance, the gesture looked maternal, but when she leaned closer, her voice dropped low enough that only the child could hear it. "You always cost too much." The sentence landed like a spark in dry grass. Lila's breathing changed instantly. Fast. Shallow. Her fingers tightened around Rowan's sleeve. The room blurred. Her chest felt tight. Air seemed suddenly difficult to reach. Rowan noticed the shift immediately. He stepped forward, placing himself between Corinne and the child. "You don't get to touch her," he said quietly. Corinne raised an eyebrow, feigning surprise. "You're frightening her." Rowan's voice remained calm. "No," he said. "You are." Lila's breathing accelerated. Panic doesn't ask permission. It erupts. Rowan crouched beside her, instantly lowering himself to eye level again, the same way he had in the community center days earlier. "Look at me," he said gently. Her eyes darted. She couldn't focus. Rowan slowed his own breathing deliberately. "In," he said softly. He exaggerated the motion slightly so she could see it. "Out." The room watched silently. In, Rowan repeated. After several seconds, Lila's shoulders dropped slightly. Her breathing slowed. Her eyes finally locked onto his. "There you are," Rowan murmured. Across the room, Corinne crossed her arms. "She's unstable," she said sharply. "You see what I mean?" Before Rowan could respond, the office door opened again. Tessa Rourke stepped inside, holding a folder. "I've confirmed with the court," she said calmly. "There is no signed order reversing guardianship." The county officials straightened immediately. Without written authorization, they had no authority to remove Lila. Corinne's expression hardened. "This isn't over," she said quietly. Rowan stood beside Lila. "No," he replied evenly. "It isn't." Outside the office, the school hallway continued its ordinary morning routine. But inside that small room, the conflict had crossed an invisible line. What began as a quiet decision in a community center had now become something public, and public conflicts rarely end quietly. The headlines arrived faster than the legal paperwork. They always do. By the next morning, several regional news sites had already discovered the story. Millionaire CEO in custody dispute over foster child. Philanthropy or publicity veils motives questioned. Grieving executive seeks guardianship amid legal challenge. Words arranged carefully can transform generosity into suspicion. Rowan Vale read the articles on his phone while standing in the quiet kitchen. His expression didn't change. Across the room, Lila sat at the table coloring inside a small notebook. She worked slowly, carefully, staying within the lines, as if mistakes might cause something important to disappear. The television mounted on the wall displayed a muted morning news broadcast. Rowan reached for the remote and turned it off. The silence returned immediately. At the kitchen island, Tessa Rourke leaned over her tablet reviewing court filings. "Corinne's attorney moved quickly," she said. Rowan set his phone down. "What are they claiming? Instability?" Tessa looked up. "They're suggesting your decision is emotional, that you're trying to repair personal grief." Rowan didn't respond right away. His gaze drifted toward the staircase. Upstairs, the soft glow of the moon-shaped nightlight was still visible in the hallway. Miles Ketter entered the kitchen carrying a fresh stack of legal documents. "They're building a narrative," he said. "What kind?" Miles slid a page across the counter. "One where you're a powerful man acting impulsively." Rowan scanned the document, and the counter-argument. Miles tapped the trust records. "Financial motive." Tessa nodded. "We show the court that the custody contest appeared only after guardianship threatened the trust payments." Rowan folded the document carefully. Across the room, Lila glanced toward them. Children always notice when adults begin speaking in serious tones. Are they mad at you? She asked quietly. Rowan walked over and crouched beside her chair. Some people are asking questions, he said. Lila studied his face. Did I cause that? The question was careful, small. Rowan shook his head immediately. No. He placed a hand lightly on the table beside her drawing. You didn't cause any of this. Lila looked down at the paper again. She continued coloring, but her lines were no longer quite as steady. Across the kitchen, Miles lowered his voice. They're pushing this into the public arena. Rowan stood slowly. That was always the risk. Outside the large windows, Lake Erie rolled quietly against the shoreline. But the calm water didn't reflect what was coming. Because once a story becomes public truth, and narrative begin competing for attention. And narratives are rarely kind. 2 days later, Rowan sat at the long glass conference table inside the headquarters of Vail Dynamics. The boardroom overlooked downtown Cleveland. From the 20th floor, the city appeared calm and orderly. Inside the room, the atmosphere was anything but calm. 6 board members sat around the table. Financial reports lay open in front of them, but no one was discussing business. One of the directors cleared his throat. Rowan, we need to address the situation. Rowan leaned back slightly in his chair. Which situation? The custody case. Another board member adjusted her glasses. The headlines are raising concerns among investors. Rowan folded his hands calmly. They're headlines. Yes, she said, but headlines influence perception. A third director spoke more cautiously. We're not questioning your intentions. Rowan raised an eyebrow. Then what are you questioning? Optics? The word hung in the air. Optics, a polite corporate term for reputation risk. One of the senior board members leaned forward. Your personal history is being referenced publicly, he said carefully. Rowan knew exactly what he meant. The death of his daughter. A tragedy that had never left him, even if he rarely spoke about it. They're suggesting your judgment might be compromised. For a moment, the room was completely silent. Rowan's expression remained calm. My daughter is not a talking point for shareholders. The board members shifted uncomfortably. We're recommending temporary leave, another director said, until the legal dispute resolves. Rowan considered the suggestion. Then he stood, slowly. You're asking me to step aside because I chose to protect a child. That's not what we're saying, someone replied quickly. Rowan looked around the room. I built this company from a rented office and one contract, he said evenly. It can survive a headline. He paused. But that child might not survive another removal. No one answered. Rowan gathered his documents from the table. As he walked toward the door, the board members remained seated in uneasy silence. Outside the conference room windows, the city moved normally. Traffic lights changed. People crossed streets. Businesses opened. But Rowan knew something they didn't. Some decisions were not strategic. Some decisions were moral. And once a person understands the difference, stepping back becomes impossible. That evening, Rowan returned home earlier than usual. The house was quiet again. But something felt different. He noticed it immediately when he reached the upstairs hallway. The door to Lila's room was fully open. Inside, she sat on the floor beside the bed. Her pink suitcase lay open, half-packed. Rowan paused in the doorway. What are you doing? He asked gently. Lila didn't look up right away. She folded a sweater carefully before placing it inside the suitcase. They're mad at you, she said. Who? The people on TV. Rowan realized then that the television downstairs must have been turned on earlier. They said you're unstable. The word sounded unfamiliar in her mouth, like she wasn't entirely sure what it meant, but she understood that it was something dangerous. I don't want to make things worse for you, she added quietly. Rowan stepped into the room and sat on the floor beside her, not towering, not correcting, just level. You're not making anything worse. Lila picked up another shirt. But if I leave, she said slowly, maybe they'll stop being mad. Rowan shook his head. You don't get removed from my life because things get difficult. Lila looked at him carefully. You promise, Rowan nodded once. You are not a contract, he said. You are not a headline. He reached forward and gently closed the suitcase lid. You are my family. The sentence settled in the room quietly. Lila searched his face for several seconds. Children who have experienced instability always test the durability of promises. Finally, she nodded, but she didn't latch the suitcase shut. Not yet. Trust grows slowly. Rowan stood and walked toward the doorway. Before leaving, he looked back once. Lila had moved to the bed and was drawing something on a piece of paper. A simple house, a small square with 2 windows, and a porch light glowing brightly above the door. Rowan recognized the symbol immediately, a light that stays on. Not because someone fears the dark, but because someone is waiting. Downstairs, his phone buzzed, a message from Miles. Court date scheduled. The fight was no longer theoretical. The next chapter would unfold inside a courtroom, and their stories would no longer be told quietly. Family courtrooms are quieter than people expect. There is no dramatic music, no raised voices echoing through marble halls, just fluorescent lights, worn wooden benches, and the quiet weight of decisions that reshape lives. Lila Wren sat between Rowan Vale and Tessa Rourke at the front table. Her feet didn't quite reach the floor. Her hands rested in her lap, folded carefully together. Across the aisle, Corinne Vale sat beside her attorney, posture, perfect expression, calm. Appearances mattered here. The hearing began with Corinne's attorney speaking first. His voice was smooth and measured. Your Honor, Mr. Vale is a powerful businessman, but power does not equal emotional stability. His recent decision appears impulsive, driven by unresolved personal grief. The courtroom remained still. Rowan didn't react. Miles Ketter stood next. He approached the bench carrying a thin folder. We asked the court to examine timing, he said. Inside the folder were financial records, trust schedules, guardianship filings, dates aligned with quiet precision. Monthly trust distributions were directed to the legal guardian, Miles continued. Notably, this contestation of custody appeared only after Mr. Vale filed for guardianship that would redirect those funds. A ripple moved through the courtroom. Corinne's composure flickered. Tessa testified next, explaining Lila's behavior. Her responses are not signs of instability, she said calmly. They are signs of adaptation to uncertainty. Finally, Rowan stood. He spoke only once. My daughter cannot be replaced, he said quietly. But grief does not make someone unfit to protect a child. He glanced briefly toward Lila. It makes them understand what loss truly means. The judge reviewed the documents in silence. Pages turned slowly beneath the steady light of the courtroom. Financial records, medical evaluations, witness statements. Evidence often speaks louder than emotion. When the judge finally looked up, the room seemed to hold its breath. The court does not determine guardianship based on wealth, she said calmly, nor does it rely on public perception. Her eyes moved from Corinne to Rowan. It determines guardianship based on the best interests of the child. She tapped the financial documents lightly. The timing of this contestation raises serious concerns regarding financial motive. Corinne's attorney shifted in his seat. The judge continued. Professional testimony confirms the child has shown improvement under Mr. Vale's care. A brief pause followed. Then the final sentence arrived. Emergency guardianship is granted to Mr. Rowan Vale. Proceedings toward permanent adoption may continue. The gavel struck once. Clean. Final. Across the courtroom, Corinne's carefully maintained expression cracked for just a moment before she looked away. But the decision had already been made. Lila turned slowly toward Rowan. Her voice was almost a whisper. You picked me. Rowan's expression softened. No, he said gently. We chose each other. For the first time since entering the courtroom, Lila smiled. Not cautiously, not briefly, but fully. Years passed quietly, not dramatically, gradually. The once silent house on the hill began to change. Hallways that had once echoed with silence now carried the sounds of homework conversations, music drifting from upstairs bedrooms, and occasional laughter from the kitchen. The moon-shaped nightlight remained plugged into the wall long after Lila stopped needing it. Some lights stay on because they remind people where they began. The pink suitcase eventually moved into the back of a closet. Dust gathered slowly across its surface. One autumn afternoon, several years later, Rowan and Lila returned to the same county community center where their story had begun. The building looked different now. New paint, different staff, but the colored tape lines still marked the floor. Children stood along them, quietly waiting. Lila paused when she saw one boy standing slightly apart from the others. His shoulders curved inward, his eyes fixed on the floor. She recognized the posture instantly. Without being asked, Lila stepped forward. Then she did something Rowan had done years earlier. She knelt. Eye level. I know what it feels like, she said gently, when people walk past you. The boy looked up slowly. Lila smiled. But you're not invisible. Behind her, Rowan stood quietly watching. The bravest legacy a person can leave behind is not wealth. It is interruption. Interrupting systems that overlook children. Interrupting stories that treat people like numbers. Interrupting silence when someone whispers, "Nobody picks me." That night, back at the house above Lake Erie, the porch light turned on automatically. Not because someone feared the dark, but because someone had learned the value of waiting for a child to come home. Did this story move you? Share your thoughts in the comments and rate this story from 1 to 10. Don't forget to like, share, subscribe to the channel, and click the bell icon so you don't miss other heartwarming stories. Click on the last screen to see the next emotional chapter waiting for you. See you in the next story.